Good morning and welcome to our third virtual speaker series of the year, Wildfire Prevention, Updates, and More. My name is Francesca Hernandez Feliz, and I am your Interim Association Executive. We do have a full agenda today, and I look forward to getting to it. But first, there are a couple of housekeeping notes that I'd like to share. So, everyone is muted by default. I ask that if you have any questions to please type them in the Q&A feature. I'd like to recognize our 2025 President, Anna Frost, and any of our Board of Directors and committee volunteers who are present on this webinar. Thank you. Before we get started, one important disclaimer. So the views expressed by our guests are their own and not necessarily those of the Marin Realtors or affiliated entity. Also, nothing should be taken as legal advice, nor shall it be considered tax advice. As always, ask your broker or manager. Also, this event will be recorded, so please act accordingly. All right, that concludes all of our housekeeping. And now, Madam President, the floor is yours.
Good morning and welcome to this morning's speaker series. I'm looking forward to introducing our speakers, Chief Jason Weber and Chief Scott Alber. We all know that wildfires are a big issue in Marin County. They have been for a while and they seem to be getting worse. We have here in our webinar some of the best firefighters and fire officials in the state working to keep us safe. The danger from wildflowers, not wildflowers, but wildfires, is ever present and always evolving. As realtors, it's important to stay on top of these changes, and we know that. We need to be able to keep our clients safe and give them the good sound information for safety and for preparing their homes for sale. Typically, we talk about the wildfire big picture, and we overlook a lot of the smaller steps that our homeowners have to take, but they need to know more. And it's about hardening our homes, doing those little things that will protect us from wildfires in the future. Today's webinar will touch on some of those topics. We invited Chiefs Weber and Alber today because they lead the effort in keeping us safe from wildfires. They have a wealth of knowledge about it, how fires spread, and what can be done to keep houses safe from them. With important changes to zone zero regulations coming soon, now felt like a great time to bring them in. And I'm now pleased to introduce our two guests. Chief Jason Weber serves as the Marin County Fire Chief, bringing decades of experience and leadership to the department, beginning his fire service career in the mid-1990s. Chief Weber has risen through the ranks, serving as a seasonal firefighter, paramedic, engineer, captain, battalion chief, and deputy fire chief. His leadership focuses on aligning the department's mission and values with the needs of the communities that it serves. Chief Weber provides strategic oversight in critical areas such as administration, emergency operations, fire suppression, emergency medical services, emergency communications, and vegetation management. That's a lot to cover. He also holds leadership roles at the state and the regional level, serving on the California Wildfire Coordinating Group as chair of the Cal Fire Association of Contract Counties and as executive officer of the Ross Valley Paramedic Authority. A key contributor to wildfire resilience efforts, Chief Weber played a pivotal role in establishing the Marin Wildlife Prevention Authority. He holds an associate degree in fire science from Santa Rosa Junior College, a bachelor's degree from California State University, Long Beach, and a chief fire officer certification from the State Fire Marshal's Office. Chief Alber serves as the fire marshal for the Marin County Fire Department, where he oversees the Fire Prevention Bureau, leads fire investigations, and acts as the team leader for the Marin County Fire Investigation Team. A graduate of San Diego State University with a degree in mechanical engineering, Chief Alber began his professional journey in the aerospace industry. He earned the certifications as a professional mechanical engineer and fire protection engineer, and later specialized in fire-related failure analysis as a consultant. Continuing his family legacy as a third-generation firefighter, Chief Alber transitioned to the fire service in 1999 as the fire prevention officer of the Sausalito Fire Department. He joined Marin County Fire in 2002, where his leadership and technical expertise have been instrumental in advancing fire prevention and safety initiatives across the county. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Thank you for having us, Anna.
We're very pleased to do so.
All righty, and if we're ready to jump into it, we'll bring up the PowerPoint here. Oh, last slide. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Righty, getting a thumbs up. So thank you for having us. Earlier this year, the state rolled out the hazard severity zone maps and associated changes. A lot of questions came forward. We met with a smaller group of your association and promised to return with the hopes that the state would have been a little further along in their decision-making process, so we'd have a little bit more information to share. But unfortunately, the state's not there. We will share with you what information we have and what we anticipate the state doing and the timeline for that as part of this. Some of the questions that we'll focus on today, what effect does the map adoption have on residents and the associated piece of zone 0, which is that first 5 feet around the house? What specific concerns are we hearing from community members? And I'm sure from your hearing as well. Insurance impacts, evacuation routes, development implications, those all seem to be top of mind related to wildfire. Scott is going to kick us off with some of the code stuff and the actual process associated with the fire hazard severity zones. And then I'll come in towards the end and talk a little bit about what resources are available to both you as realtors to give to your clients, but also for our constituents in getting to compliance or a safer space. And then, of course, we'll open it up to any questions the group has. So to kick things off, Scott will start. And just from the timeline perspective, unfortunately, we don't have any more information than we did. I think it was May that we met with your group, maybe earlier, from the state. They haven't rolled anything out yet, but we're promised by the end of the year they will. So I'll turn it over to Scott, and I'll see you guys in a moment.
Hi, everybody. So back in the 2003, we had this huge Southern California firestorm. Some of you may remember. And there's a Blue Ribbon Commission formed in response to that by the governor. And one of the recommendations was that the state CAL FIRE, map the state for fire hazards. And the result of that was, maps identifying fire hazard severity zones from very high to moderate. And so that applied to state responsibility area. And we can talk about and see the jurisdictional areas defined on this slide. State responsibility area, or where CAL FIRE has responsibility for wildfire prevention and suppression. Local responsibility, or LRA, is basically incorporated cities and towns and urban areas. And federal responsibility, obviously, is the national parks and national forests, where they have responsibility and there's federal oversight. But getting back to the mapping, so the state mapped fire hazard severity zones in SRA, ranging from moderate to very high fire hazard severity zones, and then in 2007 came out with maps of the LRA, only identifying very high fire hazard severity zones. And those were basically in force until this year, where state responsibility areas and local responsibility areas were remapped. State responsibility area fire hazard zones, still mapped, the moderate to very high, but in the latest effort, they used the same method they used for state responsibility area to map the local responsibility areas, and including moderate to very high. So, and they also, as part of this effort, required all the local jurisdictions to adopt these LRA maps. So,
Scott, can I jump in for just a
yeah,
second?
sure.
Did we clarify the difference between what is state responsibility area and local responsibility area? Okay.
Yeah, it's right here.
So
The jurisdictional areas are defined here, but
yeah, I think layman's terms, the easiest is if it's in a city or town, it's local responsibility area.
right,
It's unincorporated, it's most likely state responsibility area, unless if it's on federal land. And of course, that's our National Park Service lands in the county.
right. There's small areas of Marin County that are unincorporated that are LRA, but like parts of Upper Lucas Valley, parts of Novato, and Marin City has portions of LRA, which are unincorporated. But in general, most of the unincorporated Marin is SRA. So, as I mentioned, the first comprehensive mapping was in 2007 of the LRA, but that only identified the very high fire hazard severity zones. And the new maps that were just adopted this spring include moderate to very high in LRA. So we'll go to anybody have any questions about that? You can go to the next slide. So here's just a quick view of the 2007 map of LRA next to the 2025 map. And the main points you should note here is Mill Valley and Novato in particular, they lowered a lot of the very high fire hazard severity zones in red here to high. And the only areas that really increased in fire hazard is, Angel Island, and nobody knows why. They went from moderate to very high. And you can't really see on this map, it was kind of hard to see, but Sea Drift is LRA, and a portion of it went to very high, and the southern portion of Sausalito went from high to very high, but the northern portion of Sausalito went from very high to high. So a lot of so we lost in the change, we lost a lot of very high in the county, which is good from the perspective of the AB 38 inspection program and all that. So anyway, that's really the main changes. It actually, most of the fire hazard zone levels of hazard were reduced. I guess we can go to the next slide. So the key changes, as I mentioned in the LRA, is inclusion of the moderate and high zones in LRA from just very high back in 2007. They made these changes because they have much better localized climate data and enhanced ember modeling. The computer modeling has really really gotten a lot better since they last did these maps 20 years ago. And they updated the hazard projections for 30 to 50 from 30 to 50 years. So the fire hazard severity zone maps are a tool. They're not used to cancel people's insurance or have development bans. They're just used as a basis for how we go about inspecting having defensible space inspections, WUI building standards, and our ordinances where they're going to be applied. They're not a property risk assessment. They're not, we're not going to enforce a building moratorium in these areas. And as I mentioned, they're not tied directly to insurance company decisions. Insurance companies are using their own models and their own economic plans to make decisions about coverage. They're not. I don't think they're not really looking at these fire hazard severity zone maps for that. And there's a difference between there's a distinction between hazard and risk. I'm not in distress. My lights are turning off. So hazard. Hazard is that I like to use the analogy of going over Donner Pass. The hazard is snowfall, right? And the risk can be mitigated. The impacts of that hazard can be mitigated by carrying, which risk can be mitigated, hazard cannot. So the risk can be mitigated by carrying chains and food and that sort of thing, and that's how you mitigate risk. So in terms of defensible space, we have the hazard of wildfires, right? And you mitigate the risk that hazard presents by home hardening or defensible space implementation. So it's kind of it's a distinction that should be kept in mind, that these are hazard maps, not risk maps. So I think you can go to the next slide, Chief. So this is a chart put out by CAL FIRE, and it kind of describes, makes a difference between SRA and LRA, and describes what, it's a lot to digest here, but describes what the hazard zones mean in terms of these different items. So the main thing here is that in SRA, so the Chapter 7A item there is a chapter in the building code that applies to new construction in these various zones. So in SRA, the Chapter 7A requirements apply to any fire hazard severity zone, or if the home is located in a designated WUI. In LRA, the Chapter 7A requirements, then this slide is incorrect because it says it applies to high fire hazard severity zones in LRA. It only applies to very high fire hazard severity zones in LRA or the WUI. So I should probably talk a little bit about the difference between a fire hazard severity zone and the WUI. The fire hazard severity zone is based on, as we might have mentioned earlier, frequency of fire weather, slope, topography, fire history, potential Ember broadcast, while the WUI is just based on a range of structure density in proximity or within wildlands. So, for example, let's just talk about Upper Lucas Valley. So Upper Lucas Valley is right adjacent to a bunch of open space and wildland. So it is in the WUI. But Cholino Valley, out in West Marin, while it's in a fire hazard severity zone, it is not in the WUI because the structure density is very low out there. So that's why if you look at a WUI map, you'll see, the villages of West Marin and areas of, along the 101 corridor being in the WUI, but a lot of West Marin is not because the structure density isn't there. So it's really apples and oranges, and a lot of people get confused between the WUI and fire hazard severity zones. So fire hazard severity zones again are based on a bunch of criteria to rate them as moderate to very high, where the WUI is just based on structure density and proximity to wildland. So in terms of the AB 38, requirements, so basically a AB 38 inspection is required in both SRA and LRA in very high and high fire hazard severity zones. They might, there's talk of maybe changing that, but we're just kind of like the zone 0 waiting for more information from the state. So we did adopt we and the rest of the fire agencies in Marin did adopt the LRA maps this spring. We were permitted to change them if we made them more restrictive, higher fire hazard severity zone than the state did, but no fire agency did that. They just adopted the state maps. So that's all been done. The new adopted maps have been posted and made a part of the AB 38 lookup tool that I'm sure most of you have used. And just ongoing public education engagement as questions arise and we get more information. That's going to be ongoing.
Great, thank you, Scott. So as Scott mentioned, we were required to adopt those maps as local agencies, and have done so. And as I mentioned at the beginning, really, the next step is what does zone 0 look like and what are the associated impacts? I think one of the benefits of this county is that the fire agencies collectively have like ordinances across the entire county. And that's probably a little different than all the building departments, but the fire prevention officers across the county have worked really hard, as have the fire chiefs, to align our codes and standards so they're applicable. Now, there are some differences, for example, in agencies that do resale inspections. Our agency's not one of those, but there are several out there that are still doing that. As for zone 0, I think the big question is what is going to be required, when is it going to be required, and what restrictions are going to be associated with that. And from an aesthetics perspective, people are quite concerned. I assume that's very applicable in the real estate market. I've spent a lot of money landscaping my house, and now you're telling me I can't have plants within 5 feet of the structure. We are waiting for the state. Collectively, the fire chiefs in the county said, let's not get over our skis and implement stuff that is either in conflict with what's going to come out of the state, or considerably different. So we've taken the wait and see approach, see what is the state going to put out, where is it going to be applicable, And then we will review that as fire agencies. And I think there's a commitment from all the fire agencies to keep that consistency across the county. We're not sure exactly where the state's going to land. Will succulents be allowed? Will potted plants be allowed? What is it going to look like? And then what's the education time versus the enforcement piece? And what does enforcement look like? And there are some differences between fire agencies on whether they're still in the educational mode or if they're pushing more towards citations and enforcement. And that may be individual fire agency specific based on their tolerance level. And then where does it apply across the county is still to be determined. And it can be a bit challenging and frustrating when you have a jurisdictional boundary. One side of the street is LRA, one side is SRA. Our WUI maps, which you're familiar with, I'm sure, because of Windows and other things, are generally more geographically spread out in order to accommodate risks and hazards than necessarily a state designated LRA or SRA. I think Scott and I were talking before this. We'd anticipate that we still think the state will release something here before the end of the year. We were hoping to have it prior to our code adoption cycle, which is starting, in order to add those pieces. I'm not sure if we're going to make that timeline. That adoption process is usually completed by December. And so that's what we're waiting on right now. I'm not hearing any agencies interested in tying this into resales. I know that was one of the questions that's come up certainly in your industry, as that can complicate a transaction. And then the next piece really is what resources are available for you to give to your constituents. And Fire Safe Marin has a ton of online resources to prepare yourself, harden your home, creating a defensible space or a smart yard. And so I would certainly use that to direct your clients to, or even for information for yourself. A lot of videos on there. They do a really good job with the public outreach piece. And then the second is, all of this is expensive. How can I get help doing it? And then I direct your and your clients to Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. And over here in the resident info, if you scroll down, there's information on resident grants. And the grants are very competitive. The board this year did increase the amount of allocation for grants, but they've also put some restrictions on what the grants should be used for, and cover that in the next piece here. So the first thing someone has to do is have the home evaluated for wildfire risk. And all of our agencies offer those evaluations. They're on a rotating basis. So we try to hit a house once every 2 years. And if someone's interested in pursuing a grant and they need an updated evaluation, that can be requested through your local fire agency. So they'll receive a wildfire risk report. We use a software, Fireside. It's very intuitive. It'll point out the areas or issues, and it will also give you links on how to mitigate those. Then you can apply for a grant. The Marin Wildfire reviews the grant applications to see if they meet the eligible projects. And those are things like gutter guards, fire resistant vents, non-combustible fence or gate attached to the structure, and then hazardous vegetation in zone 0. So that's really the core 4 focus areas for the grant program. You complete the risk mitigation on your property, you submit the documentation, and then you're awarded those grant funds. For folks that don't have the financial resources up front, there is direct assistance grants that aren't necessarily covered on this slide, but available through Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority as well. And then, of course, we have to have a wildfire festival. And really the highlight here is we're bringing industry and the experts together to have a conversation with the public. There's all kinds of vendors there, from non-combustible gates that attach to the house, to the array of vents that are available to retrofit the house. Marin professional gardeners are well represented there to answer questions about how to transform your landscape into a more fire resistant home. So it's a great opportunity, and that's on September 6th this year at the Marin Fairgrounds. It's free admission, and it goes from 11 to 5. And we certainly would love for all of you to push that, as I know many of you have enormous outreach abilities. And with that, I think we're open to any questions the group has related to wildfire, or some of the changes with the fire hazard severity zones and zone 0.
Thank you very much, Chiefs. I'm always kind of blown away by how really technical your jobs are. And I know that you're simplifying it to make it understandable to us lay people. I do have a question here for you, which kind of relates to something you talked about a little bit earlier. It came in advance from member Joe Burns, and he asked the question, when the Marin Wildlife Preventative Authority was being created, we were appropriately reminded that fire doesn't know city limits or fire district lines. Yet we still have 14 fire districts in the county with varied requirements, rules, and reporting. The layering of state, county, local maps continues to cloud the process of determining non-conflicting fire hazard zones. What efforts are being made countywide to better mirror a wildfire and remove arbitrational boundaries to fire safety? And I really agree with Joe's question here. Just even listening to you, I have more questions about the relationships.
Yeah, I also agree with Joe's questions, and good to hear from you, Joe. Yeah, I mean, there's no reason a small county like this needs this many fire agencies. And I think every fire chief will tell you that. And there's a whole bunch of circumstances there with that. I think one of the things we do try to do is align our codes and our ordinances. So, they are similar, but you still have to work with different jurisdictions. And you even have some fire jurisdictions that, are 3 towns and a fire district incorporated into one. So you've got cities and towns and unincorporated. And I guess the best I can do is apologize for that, and then offer the fact that it is why we collectively across the county have pushed for the adoption of WUI maps, and are more focused on that than necessarily jurisdictional boundary for application. It's also the reason why we're waiting for the state to come down with their ordinances. Then we collectively come together and make sure that we're doing things as aligned as humanly possible, because we understand it not only drives you nuts, it drives the public nuts. And I would say, if there's specific questions, reach out. But you bring up a very valid point, and I agree.
Can I ask you just a quick personal question here? Would you spell WUI?
Wildland urban interface.
Thank you.
No problem. And that really is, I mean, Scott was one of the leaders in moving that forward in this county. A lot of it the result after the Oakland Hills fire. And it meant changes to substantial remodels and the retrofitting of houses with non-combustible materials. It really addressed the outside of the house, where historical fire codes have primarily focused on the inside of the house.
Right. Francesca, do we have any questions from the audience yet? You're muted, Francesca.
There we go. Let's try. Where did it go? We did receive a question in the chat. Would you happen to know if the grants are open to multifamily units, apartment complexes, and/or condominiums?
Yes, they should be. And you can go specifically to Marin Wildfire and ask the question. I'm not sure, certainly with condominiums, the homeowners can apply. I think when you get into the larger complexes, whether it has to be the owner versus an occupant, and I would direct those questions to Marin Wildfire specifically before I answer incorrectly in a group and audience.
Thank you.
I'm curious about the relationship between Firewise and the county. And I know that you talked about it briefly there already. One of our members, Chris Backer, is now a member of the Firewise board. So I'd like to understand that better. And I always assume that Firewise is a citizen organization and the county is a government organization. But I'm thinking maybe it's not that simplistic. Could you talk a little bit about how you interface?
Yeah, so the Firewise communities are an amazing resource. It's neighborhoods coming together to work on becoming more fire resistant, fire adapted community. We have probably per capita more Firewise communities than any other county in the United States. The Fire Safe Marin has a dedicated Firewise leader. And really what we're doing is we're pushing that, I wouldn't want to say responsibility, but responsibility in some ways to the lowest level, the homeowners. And it's pretty amazing what peer support and peer pressure can do for a neighborhood. Because when we look at wildfire prevention, home hardening, you could have a single house that does everything, surrounded by homes that have done nothing. And really, that poor person that's done everything, it's certainly diminished, if not almost eliminated, by the risk that exists from the other homes. And so when we start to see things on a neighborhood scale, and when we look at a community, we really need to reach about 80% compliance with defensible space in order to have, a systemic impact. And that's what we're shooting for. And Firewise, when people get together and they muster the neighbors and they all are working towards that common goal, we can see success at that level. And so we certainly support all the Firewise groups and want to work with them. Fire Safe Marin, as I mentioned, has a designated coordinator, but it's one of the biggest impact features that are out there is communities coming together and little peer pressure.
We just got a follow-up from Katie Beacock on Firewise. I'm not sure I can access it, Francesca. Can you?
Yeah, I can cover it. So it's
Can you? Great.
Yeah, facts on Firewise. I mean, some of it's anecdotal, but insurance companies are looking to reduce their risk overall. And insurance companies don't want to insure 15 of the 20 homes in a neighborhood because they have a congregated risk there, rather than spreading it out across so they don't have major losses. Some insurance companies do offer discounts, which is indicative of the fact for being a Firewise community, that they understand the risk is being reduced. But are there facts out there that there's a direct correlation? No. I think that's one of the challenges we have in California, is stabilizing the insurance market. And you guys had some great internal experts on homeowners insurance and some of the challenges in that industry. But again, until we start to see really, 80% of homes compliant with both defensible space and basic home hardening, it's really hard on that congregate level to be able to demonstrate that we've materially reduced the risk for insurance companies to the point where they want to come back in the market. I mean, there's a whole lot of other factors there. I don't want to oversimplify the insurance piece, which we could spend probably 7 hours on and still not cover it. But you guys have some internal experts on the insurance side amongst your peers.
Okay. Thank you. Well, that kind of wipes out my question here, which was, do you think insurance will ever pay any attention to our maps? But you just pretty much set the story there, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, the insurance companies they're not using publicly available maps.
No.
They've been using different formulas. You know, certainly I think they would just like to get out of California if they could. But you know, we don't think these maps are being used by the underwriters.
No, I think that it becomes obvious to us in the field that they're not. Yeah, that's for sure. And it is
And we've
always
got
interesting to me that we have no access to what those are. I mean, you don't know until you put your house on the market if you're going to have a difficulty with that or not.
yeah, for sure. And I mean, my insurance has doubled the last 2 years. And
Hmm.
I reached out to several providers to see if I could get insurance, and they won't even insure. So we've got a question on evacuation plans. So yeah, the county is broken up into, we have several, one software program that is, you know, where we have our evacuation zones, and we have procedures for each of those zones. Our system, our notification system, Alert Marin, has all of these zones preloaded with preloaded messages. So our goal is within 10 minutes to be able to issue an evacuation order warning from the field. So if the field orders an evacuation, law enforcement and fire working together, the Office of Emergency Management has a goal to be able to get those notifications out within 10 minutes. And we've implemented a 24/7 duty officer program when we moved the Office of Emergency Services out of the sheriff's office and over in the fire and under us now. And during red flag events, when we're most susceptible to, you know, large and rapid fire growth, we actually have the person on the floor in the dispatch center 24/7. So there is no delay from the incident issuing or asking for the evacuation order to be put in place to us being able to execute that. One of the key issues is you need to be signed up for Alert Marin. And it does require that you register for that. So if you're not registered, I'll pull a little plug, visit the emergency portal for the county, and register for Alert Marin. It just takes a few minutes. And we recently replaced the software system Everbridge with a new system that I'm drawing a blank on the name, but you won't notice a difference from the end user standpoint.
We have a question here from Bridget Peterson. When was the new LRA map added to the Marin lookup tool?
Just a couple months ago, we added it. And they were there before, but the new version, once it was adopted throughout the county, we updated the tool. So that was can't remember now. It was early in the spring, a couple months ago.
And thank you to Craig. I'm noticing as I'm talking, he's dropping these links into the chat with the information for Alert Marin, Fire Safe Marin, Ember Stomp,
Great.
the grant piece. So thank you, Craig, for doing that.
That's great. A question here from George Crow. I believe I had a natural hazard provider tell me that all of San Rafael was basically going to be in the WUI, and that would mean that it would trigger AB 38. It all would trigger AB 38. Is that not the case?
No, that's not the case. AB 38 does not apply. You know, the WUI is not is irrelevant for AB 38. It's the fire hazard severity zone. So, like I said earlier, the WUI and the fire hazard severity zones are apples and oranges. They they coincide a lot, but they cover the same areas, but they're two different things.
Thank you. I have a question from Elizabeth Pedrick. It's sometimes difficult for agents to know if a fire POS inspection is required. Is this information available online for all areas of Marin?
Yeah, so we have that AB 38 tool, lookup tool on our website, in the fire portion of the county website. And you just you type in the address, and it provides you with information on whether an inspection is required. And it also tells you what fire department or what district would do that inspection.
Great, very helpful, thank you. I was struck by a comparison that was made in your presentation, and one of them was, I think it was you, Scott, we're talking about the way that you look at danger, and that parts of West Marin are not considered as in as much danger because there is not so much housing there. It's more wilderness than it is, housing clumps. And
Well,
yet,
I was speaking to that in terms of trying to delineate between the fire hazard severity zone and the WUI. I was using that example of Torino Valley, which is ranches and spread apart, so they don't have the structured density to be in the wildland urban interface. The key word there being urban, right? It's not urban there. Where a
exactly.
subdivision with a little denser and not too dense structure density, say, and I use the example of Upper Lucas Valley, it's a subdivision, and it's right abuts to open space, and that's WUI.
Okay. So I tell you, a personal experience I had was going to get a point of sale inspection with Ross Valley Fire for a home that was in downtown San Anselmo. And it was so close to downtown San Anselmo that I was told it did not require an inspection because it was downtown, which is the most built up part, obviously, of San Anselmo. So I
Right.
just don't understand the balance of the logic there.
Yeah. So portions of that area could be in the WUI because the WUI also incorporates a little Ember broadcast.
Uh,
So some areas you might consider dense, too dense to be in the wildland urban interface, could be just from Ember broadcast. But in general, the downtown areas aren't going to be in the WUI. Now, San Anselmo, because it's an incorporated city, would be LRA, right? So
okay.
so I don't I don't think downtown San Anselmo is in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone. So that's probably why it didn't require an inspection.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Joe Burns is back. CAL FIRE maps show the SRA and local agencies show the LRA. When would an LRA upzone an SRA?
I don't understand that question, but so CAL FIRE has maps for both LRA and SRA, right? So and they've mapped the fire hazard severity zones for both.
So I think if you're talking about one trumping the other, there isn't necessarily that. It's just which pieces are applicable, which requirements. If you go back to that slide that had all the different colored boxes, what's applicable in what fire hazard severity zone, high, very high between SRA and LRA, but one wouldn't trump the other. From an ordinance perspective, local ordinances can't be less restrictive than the state in the state responsibility area.
Joe, did you need any more clarification on that? He can't talk, so I'm just waiting to see. No, thank you. Thank you, Joe. Are there any particular, and I know every area has its different ordinances and rules and regulations, but is there anything out there in specific that you're seeing happen that's causing a danger zone that you see too often to be comfortable with, and something that we should be calling attention to with our sellers?
Well, I mean, that's a That's a pretty loaded question. I mean, driving through, these towns, I mean, if you compare, pictures of Marin, 70 years ago to pictures now, I mean, there's so much more vegetation now, and, much Marin was grazed, and the whole,
Different.
fuel model and vegetation was so much different then than it is now. Just like looking at a picture of Red Hill, I mean, it was oak woodland, and you know, trees spread apart, and now Marin's it's just so dense with foliage, trees, and people, planting, non-native species over the years, and the spread of that. I mean, you can still get seeds at garden shops of broom, right? So uh, it's it's a target rich environment, as we say, for mitigation. Um, it's just trying to you know get people to have like a park like setting, the vegetation around their homes, with shrubs and trees with spread apart, with nothing in the understory that would spread a ground fire up into the canopy. Um, yeah, there's
I think too, Scott, I think one of the myths is people see things as so overwhelming they don't know where to start. And
right.
really
Yeah,
there are, low cost, high impact things that can be done to any home to make it that much safer. So, people always ask, would you feel safe in this neighborhood? Probably yes. I mean, there isn't. I can't think of too many places in Marin where I wouldn't want to live. I won't publicly say where those are, but the most of them, the risk can be reduced for relatively. I mean, you don't have to necessarily reside your entire house because I have cedar shingles on the side of my house. I am not going to spend $100,000 to reside my house. I will do high impact things that are low cost to reduce, fire impingement on the house. That therefore I can keep my shingles. And that can be landscaping choices, maintenance, making sure that your gutters aren't full of, pine needles and other things. So I think if I was advising clients, I would say, don't be scared of this house. There are high impact, low cost things that can be done. Generally trees are not our full size mature trees are not our enemies. Maintaining them so there isn't, like Scott talked about, ladder fuels that'll bring it up. Most native oaks, redwoods, those kind of trees, they don't provide a huge risk from a fire perspective. A fully mature eucalyptus tree, if it's, cut back, maintained, the litter is taken care of, isn't the end of the world. Certainly I'd rather have a redwood than a eucalyptus, but there's a lot you can do, moving firewood piles away from a house, screening around a deck so there isn't a bunch of combustible material underneath it. When you do transition the deck out, maybe go to a non-combustible material. You don't have to replace your entire fence because it's wood. Maybe it's just that first 4 feet away from the house. So there are things you can do that are high impact, low cost, that shouldn't scare you away from buying a house in Marin.
also add, when we do inspections and we talk to people about mitigating some of the hazards we note, says you don't have to do everything at once. Start out close to your house, because that has the highest impact, right? And move outward from there, and then maintain what you did before and what you did initially, and then move as you move farther away from your house, keep up what you have done, closer to your house. But like I said, you don't, a lot of this can be expensive, and we don't expect you to do it all in one shot. It's a
Thank you.
multi-year process.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's very helpful. Francesca, do we have any other questions from the audience before we move forward?
We do. There's a question from Mary Kay. Do you have any influence with the insurance companies and the ways that they assess properties in terms of insurance-ability?
I sure wish we did.
We used
No,
to.
yeah, it's a bit of a mystery, frankly, for us and for others in the industry as to exactly what the insurance company is using, and all of that is proprietary, right, to them, and they're all competing for business. But we do know that we think we can have a significant impact when we have community-wide, resilience, and that's every 80+% of the households. um California is still a bit of a mix because we were paying so little for insurance for so long. And I always say we're kind of behind Florida, who is dealing with the disasters from hurricane after hurricane, and we're here with wildfire after wildfire. So stabilizing the insurance market, which means we're probably all paying a bit more, is one piece to keep the insurers in town. And then, if we can start to build resilient communities that wildfire doesn't destroy, I think we can regain competition in the market, which will stabilize. Me simplifying the insurance crisis again, but there's a lot there. We do not, other than the work we're doing, we think does have an impact. But are we materially able to show you exactly what that is? No.
Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you both for a wonderful program. I have more questions, but I'll keep them for another time. It's wonderful to speak with you and hear your great answers. I wanted to tell you how much I enjoy Ember Stomp. It's a great family event. A lot of learning to be done there. I really like the fact that you guys also provide tips for animal care in the fires. I think that's lovely. So Marin Realtors is delighted to support Ember Stop and will continue to do so. Thank you for your time here, gentlemen. Um, have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah.
Um, this is now for the audience. If you all have any topics or ideas for any upcoming shows, please speak to us. Let us know who you'd like to talk to and who you'd like to ask questions of. Before we close, I would like to add a couple of quick things, although I bet I've lost most of you by now. But before we close, I want you to know that our member Rick Liddell's house burned. Uh, Sad coincidence here with this program. He and his family are living outside of the house. They have lost all their furniture. And if you has requested any sources for furniture, give Rick a call, send him an email, send him a text, and let him know if you can help. The annual bocce tournament is Friday, September 26th. Registration will come live really quickly. It's going to be hosted by an association team with the great help of Holmes and Aaron. No, sorry, I just like Holmes Burdell. And I wanted you to know that we're excited to put this on. We found the food, so it's going to be a great event this year. Marin Realtors for Homeward Bound is an ongoing fundraising group. You can check in with them. You can see what's going on at Marin Realtors for Homeward Bound. It's MR number 4 hb.com. You can also just Google it, Major Marin Realtors for Homeward Bound. Learn how you can participate. This team has put together a great, great, fun way to raise money for an exceptional nonprofit. And so go there, check it out. There'll be more on this every week. Franklin Energy is going to be hosting a live offering for the NRA Green designation. I have that. It's a great designation to have. We're going to do that in the office on August 20th and 21st. And they'll be talking on August 27th. They'll do another training on the benefits of an all-electric home, and I know all of us need to hear more about that. Our last general membership meeting of the year is Tuesday, November 4th. The location is still to be determined. Thanks again to our speakers. Thank you all for coming and sending your questions or asking them here and now. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.